So, as you can see, we're vying for the world's largest panel ever, and I think we're probably there shortly, unless someone else wants to join. Okay, so every year at DLD, there are thousands of people coming from all over the world to learn the secret. How does Israel do it? What's the secret? I see people coming with little notepads, kind of trying to figure it out. And there are many, many ingredients. I'll share with you the secret. So if this is the panel to be. There's Israeli culture, the military. There's very old, thousands of years old traditions. Actually, necessity breeds innovation. We have a ton of R&D per capita, probably the #1 country in the world. We have a ton of engineers. We have a huge immigration from Russia. We have, many of us have a Jewish mother that pushes us to be successful. But amongst these things Israel has developed an amazing ecosystem. For my Israeli friend, it's not eco, E-C-H-O, it's eco from ecology, ecosystem, around technology and innovation. And we're going to try and talk a little bit about this here this afternoon. I think what we're trying to cover in this big panel is the fact that an ecosystem is exactly that. It covers government, it covers public sector, it covers private sector, investors, banks, lawyers. This kind of an event is part of the ecosystem. There's many elements, and we've been trying to talk about them. But first, I'm going to ask my dear panelists to provide a short intro. We're long, so a short intro would be nice about who you are.
So Bertrand Roja at Orange, working on open innovation, and I'm in charge of all the Orange Fab, which are our network of startup accelerators.
Zach Weisfeld, Tzachi for the Israeli crowd. Until lately, I was running all of the Microsoft startup programs globally. I was the founder of Microsoft Ventures, Microsoft Accelerator program globally. And now I'm running a team called ASM, which is called Accelerating Startup Nations, helping cities and countries build an ecosystem, a thriving ecosystem.
Aniel Dan, Vice President at Israel Innovation Authority, government agency that spends about $500 million every year to support innovation and create economic prosperity in Israel through innovation.
Barak Sharabi, I'm running National Accelerator for Thailand. I'm an angel investor. I do a lot of ecosystem building. I'm an ex-Israeli embassy in Thailand, and basically a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation.
Hi, I'm Edgar Harbless, CEO of Singtel Innovate, which is the corporate venture arm of the Singtel Group. I manage a $250 million tech fund, as well as we're big supporters of developing the ecosystem in Southeast Asia and Singapore.
I'm Ricardo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of B. It's an incubator in Amsterdam. We see ourselves as the biggest in Europe, 40,000 square meters and still growing. Yeah, we do lots of things.
Hi, my name is Maurizio. I'm co-founder of H-Farm. H-Farm is a former incubator 13 years ago, and today is a little ecosystem of people. We created, we turn it into a small microcosm of people. We do attract talent to create contents to deliver innovation and transformation for the business. At the same time, involving the next generation through the education, starting from the earliest grades to the highest grades. We're getting all together. That's why I call it like a very tiny ecosystem or microcosm.
Thank you. Doron Chemo, from the Ministry of Economy, Foreign Trade Administration. What we do, we are in charge of the Israeli policy trade around the world. We have 45 representatives, what we call commercial attaches. And besides that, we help companies to attract investments and help companies to export around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you can see, we have folks here that will tell us about how government supports the ecosystem. We have Maurizio who can tell us about incubators. We have Barak who tells us about accelerators. We have Tzachi who can tell us about everything. We have a gentleman from Orange and a gentleman from Singtel who can tell how they foster innovation and interface with the ecosystem. And we have Ricardo who can tell us how they're actually providing a very important element of an ecosystem, which is places for people to actually sit and innovate and be creative. But I want to start with a very simple question. Who in the audience actually knows what the difference is between an incubator and an accelerator? All right, I would say about 20%. So why don't we start with a definition? Tzachi, can you tell us what an incubator is and what an accelerator is?
Thank you for putting me on the spot.
You have more mics on the table.
So again, the only country I think that usually confuses things is Israel, because Israel had originally something called incubators, were different than the rest of the world incubators. Incubators usually around the world are super early stage programs where startups are working on their, even if it's even before product market fit, is really starting many times in universities super early on. Accelerators usually come later, so when you really work on your product market fit and first customers, and there's now even scale-ups, which are companies that are at Series A, have customers, and can go from there. But it's a highly, the good ones are, because accelerator is one of the worst, it's a misused term, everyone is calling accelerators different things, but it's when they're done well, they're highly touched programs, provide value to startups in their journey, and usually cut 2 years into 3 months or 4 months. So it's, again, done well, it's a huge value to entrepreneurs and startups.
Okay, I want to throw a question to the panel, and it's very basic, but why is an ecosystem actually important? Why can't you be creative and innovative and come up with great companies and ideas without an ecosystem? Who wants to take that? Why is an ecosystem important?
Because in order to succeed, you really need all the components, and all the components you mentioned. So let's take an Israeli ecosystem as an example. You have about 1,000 new startups created every year, about 8,000 startups active now, which is crazy. So all those startups need investment. So you need the venture capital, the angels, the financing community. You need partners, so you need the multinationals. Israel has been very successful in attracting multinationals. We have 380 multinational R&D centers in Israel, with all the big names from every industry represented. It's a huge benefit for all those startups, so they can understand the market better, have a chance to try, to pilot, to do the market validation, and to eventually partner with big companies, and so forth. You need growth companies. Growth companies need banks to finance growth. So you need the whole ecosystem in order for companies to start and to succeed, to go through the life cycle. And we've been blessed in most areas in Israel to have a full ecosystem. I think that's why we're successful. Ecosystem, sorry.
Maurizio, you've built one of the most beautiful incubators that I've ever seen. So what happened? Did the Prime Minister call you one day and say, build this, or how did this start? Why did you wake up one day and build H-Farm?
Very simple, because we wasn't aware about the difficult to do what we're doing. So we thought that was much easier. Except the jokes, it has been an amazing experience when we really learn about the elements of an ecosystem. Because Italy, outside of Venice, is not talking about Israel or Silicon Valley or those new clusters of high-tech ecosystem, but we really learn what an ecosystem is, how it works. It's a necessity of any society. An ecosystem is a consolidation of assets. Assets that comes out of the culture. So Europe is so many different ecosystems, but no ones are in so high-tech ecosystem like it is Israel. So we started envisioned by two driving forces. One was the technology, going to bring an impact to change the world. The second is the next generation as a driving force, because if we consider next generation and the exponential technology, that's the cocktail, that's the recipe for the disruption. And that's what we see happening in here, Israel or in Silicon Valley. So we've been inspired by those two driving forces, and learning about our ecosystem, which is lacking of investors community, lacking of everything that here is natural. We started really to find a way how to make a value. And in the end, we came up with the strategy that in Europe, the main asset is the diversity. And in our asset, in our target is the transformation of the existing consolidated ecosystem into a new one, because we have to survive. It is going to take time, but there's a big opportunity for those startups that are willing to cooperate to help the transformation. So we redesigned completely the way how we deal, and that was the biggest lesson we learned.
I heard this many times. A lot of entrepreneurs say, if I knew how hard it was, I never would have started. So it's interesting that even building an incubator has the same challenges. So, you know, there are many people in the audience who are trying to learn the recipe, trying to create an ecosystem where they are. So, Ricardo, is the most important thing for an ecosystem is to have a good place for people to actually sit and work? Is that the most important thing?
No, not at all. It's only a connection point. There's no online without offline. You need to meet people, and you need to get like in the right energy to do something. But I think where the place is kind of irrelevant. You can create it anywhere.
How big is your facility in Amsterdam? Where is it?
We have 3 buildings. It's 40,000 square meters.
40,000 square meters. And how many people occupy it?
We got 3,500 people roughly working every day, and we got between 475,000 and 500,000 unique visitors on a yearly basis through our events, restaurants, meeting units. So we're bringing in fresh blood every day.
And are all these people in tech, in specific areas of tech?
No, it's a broad range. We bring together the creative industry, startups, scale-ups, but also government programs and corporate innovation. So we have corporate innovation partners that really work with the startups. We don't slap a logo on the wall. It's really you have to work with the startups. And we created an environment where you can start a company, you can grow your company without leaving the building. So we have PR firms, developers, advertising companies, we have it all.
So you talk about corporate innovations, and Bertrand, why don't you tell us about what you do for innovation at Orange, because Orange, one of the world's largest telecom companies, and I can tell you from experience that 10 years ago, I don't think your job existed. I don't think within telecoms they had specific attention and budgets and resources towards innovation. So share with us what it is that you guys are doing.
Well, first, when we developed the mobile network, it was a big innovation. But we did it like 10 years ago. So now we have a long history of innovation. But obviously, the way we are doing innovation 10 years ago has nothing to do with the way we are doing it today. And I mean, the main two reasons why we are working with startups, I would say, first is to your point. I mean, today at Orange, we invest about 700 million euros annually on innovation, but it's very small compared to all the investment we see in startups. So if we don't leverage all the investment which is outside of the company to do innovation, we are missing something. And the second thing for us is speed. If we want to be quick to market, if we want to be efficient, we have to work with agile companies, and startups are agile companies. So that's really what we are trying to do. So it's going faster to market, leveraging what's outside, and it has to be a win-win situation. And so we don't provide space, but we provide business on one side. So if it's co-innovation with the startups to go jointly to market, and obviously in some cases we do some investments as well.
And do you actually have ways of measuring the success of what you're doing?
We have 2 KPIs. Our investment is ROI, we know it well. And for business acceleration, is how many startups we are doing deal with. So how many startups that we are working with, we do a deal with it. And that's the only KPI we have. And if we do a 50% success on making deals with the startups we are working with, we are quite happy.
So, I'm old enough that I remember when I was in telecom more than 20 years ago, it was impossible for a startup to get any attention at any large telecom. It was a mission impossible. If you got to have a conversation with Orange or with Cellcom Israel, whatever, it was amazing. So today, not only is it possible, it's being fostered within the companies.
To show you the transformation, even in network infrastructure, telcos, they are used to work with big manufacturers, startups. It's very hard to get startups into it. And I'm very happy to say that in Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, which is an operation we have, we are deploying a 4G network using a 4G technology which has been developed by a startup.
And what about Synctel, another very large telecom? Do you guys do the same thing with Orange? Do you do things differently? Do you have a similar or different philosophy about innovation?
Hello? It's very similar. I mean, telcos in general, the world changed quite dramatically with telcos, about 10, 12 years ago, 11 years ago when the iPhone came about, right? That had a dramatic effect. But you combine that with the pace of innovation that has accelerated tremendously in the last 10 years, you combine that with the democratization of resources, right, in terms of cloud, in terms of ability to get up and running and be able to kind of like distribute your solutions to many users through the App Store and so forth. I think for us, there was a realization that we need to engage more with the startup community. We need to be able to help source them. I mean, corporates bring a number of strengths to a startup, right? Obviously, it's the market scales, the access to customer base, it's the brand, and significant other resources. So I think for us, it was a desire to see how can we leverage on the innovation that's happening in the startup ecosystem, the real cutting edge, pushing the envelope type activities, and melding that with the resources that a telco can bring to the forefront. So that combination is something that we've worked very hard to kind of pull together. So that's why we provide funding, we provide access to our business units, and we help the corporates, the startups engage with the business units in a very meaningful way. And ultimately, I think that's what we're looking for from our perspective in terms of corporate innovation and corporate venture.
Thank you. Tzachi, you ran Microsoft's Global Accelerator program. So I want to ask you a two-part question. First, why is it necessary for a company like Microsoft that has tens of thousands of technologies working there, why do they need this? Why can't they just come up with things on their own? And two, once you explain why they need it, can you provide us with the recipe? What does it take to make a successful accelerator program?
Sure. So first of all, I think most corporations around the world understand now that they have to open up to the outside world. So corporate innovation is dead the way we know it. And the way to reignite corporate innovation is through startups and through skunk work inside the organization, and working with the outside world is super critical. When I started the program in Microsoft in 2011, I presented to Satya. He was the head of our server and tool division. I was walking around with a blog post from Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, that in 2007 wrote the blog post said Microsoft is dead. It was a title. He said Microsoft is dead. Microsoft used to shed a big shadow attack. Well, haven't realized when the shadow disappeared. And he said, I don't invite Microsoft anymore to my demo days. Right? We were completely out of the picture. Closing this cycle. So at the beginning of this year, we opened the 8th Accelerator, the company. We graduated 760 companies. They raised $3.6 billion, 55 exits, 5 IPOs. It's only second to Y Combinator and Outcomes. And startups were killing each other in order to get into the program and get engaged with Microsoft. And the company gained significant amount of customers, technology, understanding, DNA change of the company. So again, we go for hours why it's super critical for corporations to work differently now with startups. And I think many are understanding that there's a question how to execute on that. On what does it take to build a thriving program or a thriving startup ecosystem? So how many here are from cities or countries that you think can do better from an ecosystem perspective? Great. You're right. many countries and cities are in this.
Some folks are just looking at their phones, therefore they didn't get the answer.
It's okay. And look, the startup ecosystem is built, I look at it as the three parts. There are the feeders. So universities, in Israel you have the army that's a feeder into the ecosystem. You have multinationals that feeds more experienced talent that can scale companies. Then on the other end you have exit routes. Multinationals that acquire companies, exit IPO markets. And then the big question is, what do you do in the middle? What do you do in the ecosystem itself? How do we create something that's have enough volume and velocity of activity, has enough heroes? One of the cases, and I'm sure many of you in great places that could be great ecosystems, all of your successful entrepreneurs are in New York and San Francisco or in London. They're not back in your hometown, right? Because this is where they go to get funded. Part of the thing is bringing them back to be local heroes. They don't need to come back and live there. They need to come often enough and be mentors and be local heroes. Then which is the next ecosystem you're going to work with close by? Most of these ecosystems are not going to be, in the first couple of years, are not going to be as successful as Tel Aviv or London or San Francisco. It's a process. The question is, how do you build a bridge to the closest ecosystem? So there are a lot of components. I think there's a recipe. I think we've done that well in multiple places around the world. It requires resources, it requires a state of mind, and it requires a DNA shift, which is the hardest thing to do, but it is possible. It's possible, it takes time, and I'm sure that many of the people here can help do that for their countries and cities.
And while we're on the topic of accelerators, Barak, you're exporting Israeli know-how to Thailand, building an accelerator there, right? So is it different?
So first of all, many good reasons, many good points here by everyone. And yes, I agree, it demands a shift, it's a DNA shift. And when you come into a country that is set in a certain cycle, in a certain way, certain values, you really need to break everything. Yeah, you need funding, and we are under also the government, which is very important because they can provide policies that they can support and also funding. However, we changed, so Thailand already had a few accelerators, very successful ones. One of them is DPAD, the others True, so all the telcos actually open accelerators. However, what we realized that they're all using local mentors. So we basically changed everything and we started from the end. First of all, most of our mentors are global. Then we started with the one question, you mentioned a lot of points, the Israeli chutzpah, the immigration, the army, a lot of things that set for Israel. I was asked last week, what is actually the one thing that changed? You know, like Israel is different from the others. And the answer is education. You getting educated in the army, you getting educated in your first primary socialization. You being educated for almost anything. And at the end of the day, we started educating, we started breaking the cycle, we changed behaviors, we started with understanding what's the problem and what's the solution. A lot of startups that we see from anywhere, they basically have the challenge of actually understanding what they want to do, what they're trying to solve. So we came with that and we built it like that. And we started with the basics. Pitching, English. Thailand is also lacking an English proficiency. It's something quite important. People are coming from global, they want to listen to pitches, but you cannot read in Thai, right? So you need to work on that. Then you're working on unit economics, marketing, everything. So we divided it into 3 parts. One is the basic. You need to learn the basics. Then you go into advanced, learning certain skills that are required on the way. And then we have the expertise, which is human resources, how you scale afterwards, how you get in funding. Honestly. So basically we really managed to do very well. I can tell you that our accelerator is quite successful after two batches already. Most of the companies got funded afterwards. Thailand has a lot of money, just looking for the right inflow and the right startups. And I can tell you one question that was asked during the accelerator when we had the demo day was, how did you get these people to really be so clear and crystallize about what they do? And I think at the end of the day it's part of the accelerator to do so.
Okay, so we've touched upon incubators, accelerators, private enterprise innovation. I want to touch a little bit about government. And in most countries, I would say government is not a solution to the problem, government is the problem. I think I'm paraphrasing Reagan. But But in Israel, tech is the driving engine of the economy. It got our GDP up to being one of the richest countries in Europe. And the government understands that. And so the government wants to do its part in fostering this ecosystem and fueling and expediting the growth. Anya, can you tell us a little bit about what you are doing to help the Israeli tech ecosystem?
Well, we're doing quite a lot of things, and the reason is, as we discussed, the ecosystem consists of a lot of different elements. We actually support every sector. We support every part of the life cycle of the company. So from applied research universities, tech transfer, single entrepreneur, SMEs, large companies, huge companies, multinationals, the whole spectrum. And for each of the audience, we provide different tools. And I think I will talk about one aspect of what we do, which I find very useful for the countries. Because you think, wow, how come Israel has so many startups? The problem with startups is, excuse me, the entrepreneurs in the audience, a lot of the ideas are not very deep or not very suitable to the market needs. And that is to be nice, right? So I think one of the biggest issues is the ideation. Ideation is, how do you create really good ideas? How do you come up with strong ideas, and how you verify or validate them against the market needs? And these are the type of programs that I personally find very useful in new areas. So today, practically every sector is undergoing a huge change. Every industry is changing as we speak. So when I talk to multinationals, I tell them, you think you have a strategy for 10 years, 20 years, you don't know what's around the corner. Maybe 2 years from now, you find yourself in the hotel business disrupted, or you find yourself in taxi business disrupted. So I think the first issue is, how do you create really good ideas? And for that, you need to have good universities and tech transfer. That's one source. So in biotech, that's the main source of good ideas. But in other areas, you need to be very closely related to the market. So one of the programs we did last year, and it's going to be growing very strongly, is the Innovation Lab program. In this program, we bring together corporates. Sometimes they partner 2 or 3 together, and sometimes they partner with research and with VCs. But the idea is they establish a center where they have access to technology, they have access to expertise, they give entrepreneurs access to the actual market people. So at the end of the day, this Innovation Lab, it's funded by us partially. Of course, we provide incentive, but the corporates have to build their own labs. They
How much
manage it.
money? How much money do you give startups in Israel?
It's really funny when you talk about this thing. It's not about the money. I just had a meeting with a very big corporate today, and we said, this is a program we can offer you, and they said, well, it's only $15 million. And I said, well, how much do you have in your open innovation budget today? Well, they don't have $15 million. So it's not about the money. It's what we try to do when we try to attract multinationals to Israel. We provide a program, very clearly defined program, like innovation labs, like incubators, and we provide structure, requirements, funding, and the most important thing, due date. So we have a tender date, and then they have to make a decision by that date. I found that to be the most important.
I still want to press you a little bit about numbers.
Okay.
How much money does the Israeli government, through your, and I'll get to the one in a second,
easy.
how much money?
That's easy. Our budget is $500 million US.
$500 million.
It's the smallest by percentage, as a percentage of GDP, smallest government support of R&D of any OECD country.
Should be more.
Smallest participation, but allow me to say, smartly deployed.
Doron, you have another part of the ecosystem that is government helping companies? What is it? How do you provide help to the ecosystem?
True. So we're coming actually in a later stage after the Innovation Authority. While the Innovation Authority also helps companies to develop their products, we wait until basically the product is commercialized. And we have all kinds of tools helping those companies go abroad. As I said before, we have the economic missions around the world. We have tools like delegations, participating in exhibitions, also bringing multinationals here to know the ecosystem and to meet startups. But one I think of the very interesting tool we recently developed is we partnered with entities in China. Now, why China? We all know how difficult it is to get into the Chinese market and to understand what is the need of the Chinese market. So we associated with two entities, as I said, and they provide us the know-how, they provide the venue, they provide the connections to the Chinese industry. And basically what we built an accelerator. Now it's a go-to-market accelerator. We're not developing products. So all the companies that we chose together are companies that have already products that they can manufacture or a service. And in this way, together, so once again, as a government, we must go for call for proposal. So we need to choose the right companies, and after we choose the right companies, those companies they get a full training. It's a half-a-year program, which some of it is common training, some of it is tailor-made, and by that we help companies step by step, together with the support of the economic mission in Beijing, to help those companies to go into the Chinese market.
If I happen to work in different ecosystems around the world, this is a very advanced market, right? And you do things that are built on many, many, many years of advancements. And I've been asked in many places around the world, what should we do where we're at, not where Israel is at? And I think if you go back 30 years ago, the government started the VC industry in Israel. Huge impact. A lot of what we see today wouldn't have happened if the government would not have started the VC industry 30 years ago. So this is super critical. So I had a few conversations with delegations here that this grant of $30,000 here and $50,000 there. You're throwing money. Build a program that will build the right set of VCs, people that know how to invest in risk and then know how to deal with the entrepreneurs. So this has been a huge impact. The other thing that government has to do, and the government has a very unique role in building ecosystems, is labor laws. There are still places around the world, in our close Europe, that is impossible to fire, for example. It's impossible to shut down a company. You happen to have a few people here.
It's possible, you just have to pay.
It's very, very hard. So labor laws have to change. The ability to build to start a company and close a company quickly. Without these things, it's going to be very hard for an ecosystem to build itself properly. So there are things I think that need to happen even prior to what you guys are doing. So.
No, it's true, because one very important ingredient to the Israeli success, which people tend to forget when they come with a notebook to learn the secret, is time. Time. It takes time. Bill Froman brought Intel to Israel in 1974. That's 44 years ago. ICQ, the first internet success, was sold 20 years ago. And all these things took time. So today we can accelerate that because we have a ton of knowledge, we have a ton of experience, we can do it faster. But the 40 years won't become 6 months, right? It'll take time to get these things, to get things planted, to get VCs in a specific ecosystem, to get the office space that you guys are building, to have incubator. All these things take time. Yes, Ricardo?
I'm missing the urgency in the whole ecosystem equation. I think that urgency is an important factor, and I think also for Israel, it has had a sense of urgency to become the smartest.
I think.
Yeah, no, it also evolving more and focusing more in the next generation. So getting a different redesign process how to get the school involved since the beginning. and get all those accelerators be part of. I see that in China. It's like in Beijing, most of startup comes out of university, and then go to the market. So because it comes, we always talking about this all the business part and everything, but those one also in the US, looking like Facebook, all those cases comes out from the courage. And few good investors, they say, oh, he's a great kid, he has the right idea, and they bet money, and that was the story of Facebook and many others. So we need to get this more systematic in general. Here is already an ecosystem for high tech. I'm talking more about for Europe. But Europe is the time when you say it's exactly, that's a religion, it's going to take decades. Today maybe a bit less, but if we address the young people, we can have a chance to be faster.
By the way, the next panel will have a lot of young people. I'm just doing a little promo.
I just want to say
Thank
something.
you.
I'm the oldest one here.
So I just want to say something about, there's a lot of money in Asia. I see that in Thailand. Thailand is comprised of 60% of the money makers, the funding is coming from CVC, corporate venture capitals. It's amazing. The question is how do they actually use the funds? How they actually, because they're missing deal flows. It is something that is really important. I think that's why accelerators, incubators, ecosystem builders is something that's very important. I think we have a role as Israel also to participate in this game. I don't think that anyone should just start from scratch everything. There's a lot of things that already been developed and already been marketed and commercialized. And I think if we have the ability to actually collaborate with other countries and go to third countries, and we have a lot of money in the world, we can just basically talk about time. We can shorten the time to market. And I think it's quite important.
And Bertrand, I wanted to ask you a question. We used to say about France that the only contribution that they had to this space was the word entrepreneur. But over the past 5-7 years, the entire ecosystem in France has changed and has become way more conducive, or the ability to innovate in France has grown significantly. Can you say how that happened? Is that driven by something specific? Is it just a miracle? Is it a company like yours? I mean, that is definitely a change that I've seen over the last 5 to 7 years in France.
Well, first, there is no miracle. I think first in France we have a very strong asset. We have a lot of engineers, so we know how to do technology. What has changed, I believe, it's a combination of things. First, companies like Orange and other companies that are really investing in working with startups. It's also the French government, Business France, French Tech, is very active in promoting what French startup can do to attract investment, as you said. I mean, creating the condition for investment. And as you know, we have Vivatech now in Paris. It's a big event. It's a huge event. A lot of Israeli companies are coming. It's very unique because it's really showing that a big ecosystem to work has to work with investors, startups, and large corporations. And that's what Vivatech is demonstrating. And I believe it's a wide example of what's happening today in France, which is another way to do innovation, which is obviously complementary to what we see in Israel.
You're right. It's very impressive to see the kind of components that French has put together. So French Tech is a big deal. Station F is a big deal. So when you look at these components, you put them together. I don't know if someone had that plan together, but it's really impressive to see, and it is making a big change. And it's a country that you still get 2 years of unemployment. So startup is for fun. But they've done a really big change, and it's really impressive.
Edgar, Singapore is a very unique environment. Are there something specifically different that Singapore is doing to create a better ecosystem, a different ecosystem for technology, given the more central government-driven mechanisms?
So I would say in Singapore, obviously, the government has a very important role to play, and they are very committed to it. So I mean, what we're seeing in Singapore is the government has identified various sectors as being critical for the country, as well for development. So the concept of smart cities, smart infrastructure, even in healthcare, how to increasing population age, how you're going to take care of them. So they've very clearly identified areas that they feel are going to be critical to allow Singapore to continue to grow and develop. And they've obviously committed a fair amount of funds available in different ways, both at the research level, both at the kind of all the way through the chain in terms of funding, VCs and so forth, to enable an end-to-end approach, right? Because at the end of the day, an ecosystem should be one where you can start as being an entrepreneur to get all the way to get through an accelerator, an incubator, an accelerator, get your Series A, get your growth funding to B and C. So ultimately, that journey is so important. I mean, 10 years ago, everyone in Singapore was talking about the valley of death at the Series A. There was not enough VC money at the Series A to allow you to go beyond your seed funding and therefore to continue to grow your business. Today, there's a huge amount of Series A funding available. That valley of death has moved up the growth to the growth stage, Series B and Series C stage. And one thing I think the Singapore government's done a great job is realizing that, and now is trying to encourage the development of bigger growth stage funds in VC in Singapore and the region. And I think that's a very important thing for any ecosystem, is that we can all talk about how to start the ecosystem, but ultimately to be a truly successful ecosystem, you need to be able to help through the journey
we got
to
it.
the end.
All right, I think that was a very subtle hint that we're out of time. I want to thank all the panelists for having made this really easy for me. Thank you very much.